The vanishing hatchlings. The alien father woke up to a silence that felt wrong. His heart beat faster as his eyes moved to the nest. The nest was empty. The soft, pale shells were broken days ago, but the little albino hatchlings who had crawled out of them were gone. He froze, unable to breathe. His albino hatchlings were rare, fragile, and precious. They were small, weaker than the others, and every day he had guarded them with his life. Now, in the cold light of the alien dawn, the nest was nothing but dry moss and cracked shells. Panic spread through his chest. He searched the small cave, moving rocks, sniffing the air and calling out in low, rumbling tones. Nothing. No sound of soft cries, no scent of his young ones. Only silence. The father rushed outside, his claws scraping the stone floor. His pale scales glistened in the weak sunlight, making him stand out among the darker rocks. His people always mocked him for his color. They whispered that he and his albino children were cursed, too weak to survive. But he had promised himself he would protect them. Now they were gone. He roared, the sound echoing across the cliffs, startling birds into the sky. He leapt down the path, searching for tracks. His sharp eyes caught something strange in the dust near the entrance. Small footprints, light but clear. The tiny steps of his hatchlings. His chest ached with relief. At least they had walked away. But where had they gone? The father followed the trail. His claws dug into the earth as he hurried down the rocky slope. The prints were scattered, sometimes doubled, sometimes lost in the grass, but he never lost them. Each step dragged him deeper into fear. Voices reached his ears as he moved closer to the valley. Other aliens from the colony were gathering. They had heard his roar. "What happened?" one asked, his dark scales shining. "My hatchlings are gone," the father growled, not slowing down. The others exchanged looks. One of them sneered. Albino hatchlings never last long. Perhaps they wandered off to die. The father's chest burned with anger, but he did not answer. He pushed past them, following the trail. Whispers followed him. Why does he fight so hard for the weak ones? The humans are near the valley. Maybe they took them. Maybe they are already dead. Word humans stabbed into his mind. His people feared humans, called them selfish, called them dangerous. They said humans hunted the weak and stole what they wanted. If the humans had his children, what hope was left? Still, he followed the prints. They led him across sharp rocks, through thorn bushes, and down into the soft dirt of the valley floor. The tracks grew fresher. He bent low, sniffing the ground. Yes, their scent was here. His little ones had been alive when they passed this way. The father's heart pounded as he noticed something else. The hatchlings' steps were not alone. Alongside their tiny prints were larger, strange ones. Long shapes, flat and heavy. Human shoes. He froze, his claws curling into fists. The humans had been here. The hatchlings were with them. He raised his head, staring toward the distant lights of the human camp. Smoke rose into the sky, carrying the smell of fire and food. He could almost hear faint sounds of laughter, the barking of human animals. His throat tightened. Were his children in there? Were they still alive? For days, he had feared this moment. The elders had always warned, "Keep away from humans. They are clever, but they are cruel. They use, they take, they break." But his hatchlings had not simply vanished. Their tracks, their smell, and the strange human footprints all pointed in one direction, toward the humans. The father stood at the edge of the valley, the wind brushing over his pale scales. His heart was torn between fear and rage. If he entered the human land, he might never return. But if he did nothing, his hatchlings would be lost forever. The whispers of his people still rang in his ears. Too weak. Cursed. They will not survive. But deep inside he felt a fire. They were his children. Weak or strong, cursed or not, they were his. He would not let them die. With a final glance at the empty sky, he clenched his jaw and stepped forward. He followed the tracks, every step pulling him closer to the human world. The trail ended near a fence made of wood and metal. Beyond it, the human camp flickered with warm lights. Strange shapes moved inside, tall shadows, small shadows, the sounds of laughter and talk. His claws tightened on the fence post. He pressed his ear to the air. For a moment he thought he heard something faint, soft chirps, the kind only his hatchlings could make. His chest swelled with both relief and dread. They were alive, but they were in the human's hands. The father's eyes narrowed, his breath slowed. He knew this, fear of the humans. The pale-scaled father stood at the edge of the human settlement, his claws digging into the earth. The wooden fence in front of him seemed thin, easy to break, but behind it burned firelight and shadows of creatures his people feared, humans. His chest rose and fell with uneven breaths. Every story he had ever heard about humans returned now. They were clever, but their cleverness was sharp like a blade. They took what they wanted. They cut down forests. They dug holes in the land. And they killed when they felt afraid. His elders had told him many times, stay away from humans. If they see weakness, they use it. If they see difference, they destroy it. And now, his own hatchlings, weak, albino, fragile, were inside that camp. His heart ached at the thought of them. He pictured their soft white scales, their bright eyes blinking at the strange firelight, their tiny claws clinging to one another. Were they crying? Were they hungry? Or had the humans already decided they were toys, or worse, prey? The father's tail lashed behind him. Rage burned inside him, but fear pulled at him just as strongly. He crouched low in the grass, watching. Humans moved in and out of the glowing tents. Some carried sticks of fire, others carried strange metal things that clicked and clanged. Their laughter echoed in the night, mixed with the sound of barking animals. He narrowed his eyes. For a moment, he thought he saw something small near the largest tent, something pale. His heart jumped, but when the figure moved into the light, it was only a sack of cloth. The father growled low in his throat. He wanted to charge in, rip the tents apart, and take back his hatchlings. But what if he failed? What if the humans struck him down before he even reached them? His children would be lost forever. He closed his eyes for a moment, breathing hard. His people had mocked him, saying albino hatchlings never lived long. Maybe they were right. Maybe the humans had already destroyed them. But then, he remembered the sound he had heard, the soft chirps, the tiny cries that only his hatchlings could make. He had not imagined it. They were alive. He opened his eyes again, his jaw tightening. He had to be careful. He had to be clever, even more clever than the humans. Slowly, he began to move. His pale body blended poorly in the dark, but he stayed low to the ground, crawling like a shadow. He circled the fence, watching for gaps, listening for sounds. His ears twitched at every rustle of grass, every bark of a human animal. His heart pounded so loudly he feared it might give him away. At the far end of the camp, he found a corner where the fence was broken. The wood was cracked, bent as if some large beast had pushed through long ago. The gap was narrow but big enough for him to squeeze inside. He hesitated. His claws hovered over the wood. Beyond the gap was danger. Beyond it were humans. But beyond it also were his hatchlings. He thought of them again, their tiny bodies pressed against each other for warmth, their chirps filling the night. His fear melted into fire. He pushed through. Inside, the camp smelled strange: smoke, cooked food, leather, and oil. His nose wrinkled. He moved slowly, each step silent. Shadows stretched across the ground from the firelight. He stayed in the darkness, avoiding the glow. Closer and closer he crept toward the big tent in the center. The sound of laughter came from inside. Human voices, rough and strange, rose and fell like an unknown song. The father crouched behind a barrel. His heart almost stopped when he heard it. Soft, gentle sounds like little whimpers. His hatchlings. He edged around the barrel, straining his eyes. Through the small opening in the tent, he saw something that froze him. The hatchlings were there. They were alive. They lay curled together on soft cloth, their pale scales glowing faintly in the firelight. But they were not alone. A human girl sat beside them. Her hair was long, dark against her pale skin, and her hands moved gently, stroking the hatchlings' heads. She whispered softly, words the father could not understand, but her voice was calm, almost like a lullaby. The hatchlings did not look afraid. They were not crying. Instead, they snuggled closer to her as if she were family. The father's claws tightened around the edge of the barrel. His breath came hot and fast. His mind screamed, "She has taken them. She is keeping them." Yet his eyes could not deny what they saw. His hatchlings were not harmed. They were warm, safe, even peaceful. Confusion twisted inside him. All his life he had believed humans were cruel. Yet this one looked gentle, almost protective, but he could not trust it. Not yet. Humans were clever enough to trick even his children. He sank lower, his pale eyes burning with a mix of fury and doubt. He would wait. He would watch. He would see what this girl truly wanted. The night grew colder, but he did not move. He stayed in the shadows, heart pounding, eyes fixed on the human girl and his precious hatchlings. And as the firelight flickered, one thought echoed in his mind. Sharp as a blade, to save them I must face the humans, all of them. The first glimpse. The alien father crouched in the shadows, his pale scales almost glowing under the dim firelight. His eyes stayed locked on the human tent. Inside, he could see his albino hatchlings curled together, their tiny chests rising and falling in peaceful sleep. But what froze him was not only the sight of his children alive, it was the human girl beside them. She was young, much smaller than the other humans he had seen from a distance. Her hair hung loose, dark and tangled, falling across her face. She sat cross-legged, her hands resting gently on the hatchlings, stroking their pale scales as if they were fragile treasures. Her lips moved, whispering words he could not understand. But her tone was soft, steady, like the hum of a river. The hatchlings' small bodies relaxed under her voice. One even gave a tiny chirp, then settled deeper into her lap. The father's heart twisted. Relief, confusion, and anger battled inside him. His hatchlings were alive. They were safe. Yet, why were they safe in the arms of a human? His people's warnings roared in his mind. Humans are liars. They lure you with kindness, then strike. They never protect what is not theirs. He pressed his claws against the dirt, forcing himself not to leap inside. He had to know more. For long minutes he stayed frozen, watching. The girl shifted now and then, pulling the blanket higher over the hatchlings. At one point she lifted a small cup and dipped her fingers into it, touching drops of liquid to their mouths. The hatchlings licked eagerly, drinking. His chest tightened. She had been feeding them. The father's breath grew heavy. This was no careless captor. She was caring for them. Still, he did not trust it. Humans were clever enough to trick even children. Perhaps she was keeping them alive for some hidden reason. Perhaps she wanted to tame them or use them. His claws trembled at the thought. Suddenly, the girl turned her head. Her eyes lifted, staring directly toward the tent's flap, toward him. The father froze, his heart slamming in his chest. Her gaze pierced the shadows, searching. Could she see him? Could she sense him? For a long, silent moment, neither moved. His breath caught in his throat. He was ready to leap away, ready to fight if needed. But then, the girl did something strange. She smiled. A small, tired smile, gentle as a sunrise. Her hand stroked one hatchling again, and she whispered something soft. The father's claws dug deeper into the ground. Why would she smile? Why would she look toward the darkness and smile as if she knew someone was there? He pulled back, hiding deeper in the shadow of a barrel. His heart hammered, his mind storming. He should leave, gather his strength and return when the humans slept. Yet his legs refused to move. He could not tear his eyes away from the tent. Time passed slowly. The camp grew quieter. Human voices faded, footsteps slowed, the barking animals lay down. The fires dimmed. Still the girl stayed awake, her head tilting, her fingers gently resting on his children. At last her eyes closed. Her body slumped, weary. She lay down beside the hatchlings, curling around them protectively as though she herself were their guardian. The father stared, his mind spinning. This was no cruel human trick, at least not yet, and that was what made it more dangerous. If she had harmed them, he would have attacked already. But this kindness confused him. It clawed at the walls of his beliefs. He rose slightly, taking one careful step closer. His heart thundered, his tail stiff behind him. Another step. The fire crackled, but no human stirred. He reached the edge of the tent. His claws brushed the fabric. With one swift motion, he could pull it open, storm inside, and take his hatchlings. But as his hand tightened on the cloth, one of the hatchlings stirred. The tiniest one, the weakest of them, shifted in its sleep, turning closer to the girl. Its little claw clutched her sleeve. The father's breath caught. The sight stabbed him deeper than any weapon. His child, the weakest of his brood, the one he had feared would never survive, was clinging to a human for comfort. He dropped his hand from the tent. He could not yet. If he dragged them away now, they would cry. They would fight him. His own children might see him as the enemy. The thought cut him to the bone, so he stayed in the shadows, trembling with rage and confusion. He had found them alive, but not as he expected, not stolen, not broken, but sleeping, peacefully, with a human girl. The father tilted his head back, staring at the night sky. The stars glimmered cold above, silent witnesses to his torment. Tomorrow, he promised himself. Tomorrow he would act. He would take them back, no matter the cost. But deep inside, a dangerous question gnawed at him, one he could not silence. What if the girl is not an enemy? What if she is something else? The confrontation. The alien father had waited too long. The night was fading, and soon the humans would wake. His claws twitched as he crouched outside the tent, his pale eyes locked on the small forms inside. His hatchlings were there, alive, safe but wrapped in the arms of the human girl. She slept close to them, her hand resting over their tiny bodies as if guarding them. It made his chest ache with both relief and fury. Relief because they lived. Fury because they were not in his arms but in hers. A growl rumbled low in his throat. Enough waiting, enough watching. They were his children, not hers. With one swift motion, he tore the flap of the tent open. The fabric ripped with a sharp sound. Inside, the girl jolted awake. Her eyes widened as the pale-scaled figure filled the entrance, his claws glowing faint. In the firelight, his breath heavy like a storm. The hatchlings stirred, chirping softly. Then to his horror, they did not run to him. Instead, they pressed themselves closer to the girl, clutching at her clothes, hiding behind her as if she were their protector. The father's heart cracked. His claws trembled. "Mine," he growled, his voice a deep rumble. "They are mine." The girl's eyes were wide with fear, but she did not run. Her arms tightened around the hatchlings. Her lips moved quickly, words spilling out in the human tongue. He could not understand the meaning, but he could hear the tone. It was not anger. It was not cruelty. It was pleading. She raised one, hand palm open, showing it was empty. Then she touched her chest and shook her head slowly. Her other hand stroked the hatchlings gently, as though to calm them. The father's claws curled. His mind screamed to act, to take them back, to flee, before the other humans came. But the sight of his children pressed against her held him still. He stepped closer, his heavy form making the ground creak beneath him. The girl flinched but did not move away. She whispered again, her voice trembling but soft. The hatchlings chirped louder, their cries rising. The smallest one clung to her sleeve, refusing to let go. Rage boiled inside the father. Why? Why cling to her and not to me? His tail lashed, striking the wooden pole of the tent. The whole structure shook, and the girl gasped. Outside, footsteps stirred. Human voices rose in confusion. The father's head snapped toward the sound. More humans, they were coming. He turned back to the girl, his eyes blazing. He could snatch the hatchlings now, tear them from her arms, and escape before the camp surrounded him. But the cries of his children made his hands shake. They did not sound like hatchlings rescued. They sounded like hatchlings being torn away. From safety. He froze, his breath ragged. The girl leaned forward. She whispered again. Slowly this time, her words careful. She touched the smallest hatchling, then lifted her gaze to meet his. Her eyes were not cruel. They were tired, worried, but steady. The father's chest tightened. Could this human truly mean no harm? But before he could answer the question in his mind, the flap of the tent burst open. 2 humans stood there, tall and armed. One carried a long stick of iron, the other a strange tool that gleamed with sharp edges. Their eyes widened at the sight. The pale-scaled alien crouched over the girl and the hatchlings. They shouted. Their voices were sharp, angry, like the crack of breaking stone. The girl cried out too, shaking her head, raising her hand toward them as if to stop them. She pointed quickly at the hatchlings, then at the father. Her voice rose, fast and desperate. The humans hesitated, their weapons still raised but their faces uncertain. The father's heart pounded like thunder. He was trapped now, inside the humans' camp, surrounded with no escape except through them. The hatchlings whimpered, burying themselves against the girl. For the first time in his life, the father felt powerless. His strength, his claws, his rage, none of it could pull his children from her arms without breaking their hearts. None of it could silence the rising shouts outside. The girl looked at him again. Her lips moved once more, her voice trembling but firm. She tapped her chest, then touched one of the hatchlings. The father's eyes narrowed. He did not understand her words. But her meaning was clear enough. She was claiming she had saved them. The humans outside shouted again. Closer, now. The father bared his teeth, ready to strike, ready to fight through them all. But deep inside, the question clawed at him again. Was this girl his enemy? Or was she the only reason his hatchling still lived? Truth revealed. The alien father's chest heaved as the 2 humans stood frozen in the tent's doorway. Their weapons glimmered in the firelight, their faces tense and ready. The girl was trapped between them and the pale-scaled father, her arms wrapped tightly around the albino hatchlings. The hatchlings chirped louder, frightened by the noise. Their tiny bodies pressed even closer to the girl, clinging as though she were their mother. The father's claws twitched. His instincts screamed at him to fight. If he struck quickly, he might escape with his children. But one glance at their wide, frightened eyes stopped him. They were not afraid of the girl, they were afraid of him. It tore through his chest like a blade. The girl's voice broke the silence. She spoke fast, waving her free hand toward the armed humans. Her tone was sharp but not angry, more like begging. She pointed at the hatchlings, then at the father, then shook her head hard. The armed humans hesitated. Their eyes flickered between her and the father. They barked a few words back, their voices heavy with confusion. The girl stood up slowly, careful not to drop the hatchlings. She raised both hands, still holding the smallest one close to her chest. She stepped forward, placing herself between the father and the armed humans. The father's eyes narrowed. What was she doing? Why stand in front of him instead of running? Why protect him from her own people? The humans shouted again, but this time their weapons lowered slightly. Their eyes were uncertain now. They looked at the girl as if her words carried weight. The father stared, his thoughts a storm. Could it be true? Could this human child have stopped the others from harming his hatchlings? The girl turned back toward him, her gaze locked with his pale eyes. She spoke again, slower now. She tapped her chest. Then she touched the smallest hatchling, who cooed softly against her. Her hand pressed over her heart, then pointed to him. The father's breath caught. He could not understand her words, but her meaning bled through. She was saying something simple. Something impossible. I saved them. The father's throat tightened. His people had always said humans were cruel, that they would use weakness for their gain. Yet this girl, this small, fragile girl, had fed his hatchlings, kept them warm, and now stood between him and her own kind. The tent fell quiet. The armed humans muttered among themselves, then finally stepped back. They pulled the flap wide, glancing once more inside before leaving. The girl had convinced them. Somehow, with only her words, she had sent them away. The father lowered his claws slightly, though his body still trembled with rage and confusion. The girl looked at him again. This time her expression was softer, less afraid. She crouched down and placed the hatchlings gently on the soft cloth. They chirped and wriggled, stretching their tiny limbs. She picked up a small bowl from the floor. It held water. Slowly, she dipped her fingers into it and touched the drops to each hatchling's mouth. They licked eagerly, their little tongues flicking, their bodies relaxing. The father's heart squeezed. He knew the sound of thirsty hatchlings. He knew the way they leaned forward when they drank. She had been keeping them alive. But why? The girl set the bowl aside and reached into another pouch. She pulled out crushed berries, purple juice staining her hands. She fed the hatchlings piece by piece, smiling as they ate. The father's chest grew tight. He had expected to find them dead, starved, or broken. Instead, he found them cared for better than even he had managed. He stepped closer without realizing it. The floor creaked under his weight, and the hatchlings looked up. One of them chirped in delight, not at him, but at the girl. The smallest hatchling even crawled up her arm, nuzzling her cheek. The father's jaw clenched. His children had accepted her. The girl met his gaze again. She touched the smallest hatchling, then held out her hand. Not toward him, but downward, palm open, showing trust. It confused him more than any weapon could. Humans lied. Humans stole. Yet this girl had given his children food, water, and warmth. And now she offered something stranger. Peace. He crouched, his claws hovering close to the ground. He wanted to snatch the hatchlings away, but he could not. Not when they looked at him with fear, and looked at her with love. The tent was quiet again, save for the chirps of the little ones. Outside, the human camp settled back into uneasy rest. The father stared at the girl for a long time. His breath was heavy, his mind torn apart. If what he saw was true, then everything his people believed was wrong. The girl whispered softly to the hatchlings, her words like a lullaby. The father could not understand, but his children did. They curled against her once more, drifting to sleep. He watched them, torn in half. Part of him wanted to take them now, to run back to the cliffs and never return. But the other part, the part that saw his hatchlings safe in her arms, whispered something dangerous. Without her, they would already be dead. The father closed his eyes, his claws trembling. The truth was a heavy weight pressing down on him. This human girl was not their enemy. She was their savior. Between two worlds, the alien father did not sleep that night. He stayed crouched in the shadow of the tent, watching. His pale eyes never left his hatchlings, or the strange human girl who kept them safe. The fire outside the camp had burned low, and most humans slept. Only a few guards walked with slow steps, their torches glowing faintly in the dark. The father's ears caught every sound, his body ready to spring if danger came. But inside the tent, the world was quiet. The hatchlings slept peacefully, curled against the girl. Sometimes they chirped in their dreams, and she would shift gently, laying a hand on them until they calmed. Her movements were natural, protective, as though she had done this many times before. The father's chest felt heavy. This was not what he expected. His people had always said humans were selfish, that they never cared for what was not theirs. Yet this girl treated his children as if they were her own. When morning came, pale sunlight spilled across the camp. The girl woke first. She stretched slowly, careful not to disturb the hatchlings, then rubbed her eyes with small fists. Her hair was tangled, her face smudged with dirt, but her smile was soft as she looked at the sleeping little ones. The father leaned closer, studying every move. The girl reached into her pouch again, pulling out food. She crushed berries between her fingers, feeding each hatchling piece by piece. She laughed quietly when one tried to grab too much at once, its tiny jaws stained purple. The sound of her laugh startled the father. It was not mocking or harsh, it was light, warm, almost like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. His claws tightened. He wanted to believe this was real. But what if it was a trick? What if she cared now, only to use them later? Still, the truth stood clear before him. His hatchlings were alive because of her. The larger humans entered the tent a little later, bringing more food and water. They spoke to the girl, their voices low but serious. She nodded, answering quickly, her hands moving as she explained. The father caught the way she pointed to the hatchlings, then to herself. The humans frowned but did not argue. They left, shaking their heads as if they did not understand her choice. The father narrowed his eyes. This girl had convinced even her own people to let the hatchlings stay with her. That was no trick. That was something stronger. Something even he could not name. Later, when the camp grew quiet again, the girl carried the hatchlings outside. She sat in the grass beyond the tents, letting them crawl and explore. Their pale scales glittered in the sunlight as they tumbled clumsily over her hands. The father followed from the shadows, his heart twisting at the sight. His children chirped happily, chasing after her fingers. The smallest one climbed onto her shoulder and squeaked in delight as she laughed again. It was a sound he had never imagined, his hatchlings laughing with a human. His tail lashed with unease. This was wrong. They belonged to him, to his people, not to hers. But when he saw the way they clung to her, he realized something painful. If he took them back now, they would cry. They would resist him. His throat tightened. He was their father. He had sworn to protect them, yet now they looked to someone else for safety. The girl lay back in the grass, her arms spread wide. The hatchlings crawled across her chest, chirping and tugging at her clothes. She closed her eyes and laughed again, unafraid of their claws or sharp teeth. The father's mind spun. She was no warrior, no elder, not even strong. Yet she had done what his people would not. She had cared for the weakest. When the sun began to set, she gathered the hatchlings back into her arms and carried them inside. She tucked them under, blankets humming softly until they closed their eyes. The father stayed at the edge of the tent, torn in two. One part of him wanted to storm in, claim his hatchlings, and flee back to the cliffs. That was the way of his kind. Children belonged with their own blood, but the other part, the part that had watched her feed them, play with them, laugh with them, whispered a dangerous truth. Perhaps the girl was not stealing them. Perhaps she had given them something he could not. As night fell again, the father's heart burned with conflict. He was caught between two worlds. One was the world of his people, filled with fear and hate for humans. The other was here, in this camp, where a fragile human girl had shown kindness stronger than any blade. He pressed his claws into the earth, his breath ragged. The stars glittered cold above as if watching his torment. For the first time in his life, he did not know what to do. And then, just before sleep claimed the hatchlings, something happened that shattered his heart. The smallest one, the weakest of all, lifted its tiny head and chirped a word, not in his tongue, not in the language of his people. It said the human girl's name. The father's breath stopped. His eyes widened, his whole body trembling. His hatchling's first word was, not for him, it was for her. The choice. The alien father stood outside the tent, frozen. His chest rose and fell in heavy, broken breaths. The sound of his hatchling's voice echoed in his ears. The smallest one, the weakest one, had spoken its very first word. And it was not his name. It was not a word from his people's tongue. It was the human girl's name. The father's claws trembled. His heart cracked. For days he had feared they were dead, only to find them alive. For days he had told himself he would bring them home, but now he understood a painful truth. They did not see him as their savior. They saw her, the human girl. Inside, the hatchlings curled against her chest, murmuring soft chirps as they drifted to sleep. Her hand rested over them protectively, her eyes already closing in exhaustion. She looked as though she had always belonged with them. The father's tail lashed. His people would never accept this. If the colony discovered what he had seen, they would call him weak. They would call his children tainted, unworthy of their kind. They would say the humans had stolen them, and he had failed as a father. But when he looked again at his hatchlings, safe and warm in her arms, he knew none of that mattered. The only thing that mattered was them. Still, the choice burned inside. Him. He could take them now. He could storm the tent, rip them from her embrace and flee back to the cliffs. He would raise them alone, far from human hands. That was what his people would expect. But if he did, they would cry. They would suffer. And in their tiny hearts they might come to hate him. His throat tightened as the thought pierced him. Could he live with that? The camp outside stirred. The other humans were waking. Fires crackled to life, smoke rising into the morning sky. He could not wait much longer. He stepped forward, his claws scraping the earth. He pushed the flap of the tent aside. The girl woke instantly. Her eyes widened at the sight of him, but this time she did not scream. She only sat up, her arms tightening around the hatchlings. The father lowered his head, his voice a low rumble. Mine, he growled softly. They are mine. The girl did not run. She looked into his pale eyes, her own gaze steady. She spoke, in her human tongue, slow and gentle. Though he could not understand every word, he felt the meaning in her tone. She was not keeping them from him. She was keeping them alive. The hatchlings chirped, wriggling between them. One reached for him with a tiny claw, then turned and nuzzled against her. They were caught between two worlds just like him. The father sank to his knees, his chest heaving. His claws hovered in the air, shaking as he reached toward them. But when his fingers touched their soft scales, they did not move closer. They clung tighter to her. His heart broke. Yet in the shards of that pain, a new truth glimmered. The girl was not his enemy. She was their protector. Slowly, carefully, he lowered his claws. His voice trembled as he whispered in his own tongue. You. Keep them safe. The girl tilted, her head, not understanding the words but perhaps sensing the meaning. She gave a small nod. Her arms loosened just enough to let one of the hatchlings crawl toward him. The tiny body pressed against his chest, chirping softly. He held it close, closing his eyes. The warmth filled him with a bittersweet ache. But when the hatchling turned back, reaching again for her, he knew his choice was made. He could not tear them apart. Not from her. Not when they had already chosen her as family too. The father rose slowly. His pale eyes met the girl's once more. For a long, silent moment, two beings from different worlds stood across from each other. Alien and human, enemies by nature, yet bound by the fragile lives between them. Then, with a deep breath, he stepped back. He did not take the hatchlings away. He let them stay. The girl's lips parted in surprise. She clutched the little ones tighter, her gaze softening. The father turned toward the flap, his chest heavy but certain. He had made his choice. His people would not understand. They would call him broken. But he knew the truth. The human girl had saved his children. She had given them more than life. She had given them love. And for that, he would trust her. As he slipped into the shadows of the camp, his ears caught the sound of his hatchlings chirping once more. Their voices were bright, alive, filled with joy. The father lifted his head to the sky. The stars still glittered faintly in the dawn. He wondered what stories they would tell of this strange bond, of a father who let his children sleep in the arms of a human. Whispers would spread. His people would not believe it. The colony would judge him. But the galaxy would soon learn. Because this was more than a strange moment. It was the beginning of something greater. Something that might one day change everything.